Welcome back to ProTradeCraft's Career Toolbox, where we help you turn your day job into a career. This is Don Fernando, your host, and my pronouns are his, him. Today's topic, breaking down gender bias, a toolkit for construction business owners. Why? The construction trades have long been one of the industries with the lowest percentage of women in the workforce. Less than 4% of workers in the construction trades are women. Data on the percentage of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer workers is not available, but no doubt it's also very low. In part, this may be because the trades have not always been a friendly place for women and LGBTQ workers, who face bullying and discrimination as a result of sexism, homophobia, and transphobia in our industry's predominantly male-oriented workplace. Our guests today, Kate Stevenson and Mel Baser, have developed what they call a toolkit for breaking down job site gender bias. And we all love tools, so we will open this toolkit and see what's inside. Welcome, Kate and Mel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fernando.
Thanks, Fernando. Mucho gusto.
Mucho gusto. Thank you for being here. Mel, as you can hear, has spent many years living in Latin America, and I just learned that today. Quite an interesting background. But let's start this discussion with cold practicality. Why change workplace culture to embrace inclusivity?
Well, construction in general has just had a reputation for not being a very welcoming, great work environment, right? We know that we can and that we really need to do better to attract people to work in the trades. That's not just about diversity and inclusion. That's how do we create a place where people really want to come to work in the morning, where they feel valued for their skills and their contributions, and they feel like they're doing important work. We know that we need more folks in the trades in general because of the huge workplace shortage that we have.
We've been talking about, and we've had a few sessions on this podcast about it, incorporating women into the workplace, into the construction site workplace. And we've had some actually very nice conversations about it. And I think there is an improvement in that area. If it's not great, it's, maybe it went from 2% to 5% or 4%, but there is some movement in that direction. But what about LGBTQ? LGBTQ is an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning. LGBTQ.
Well, I'll jump in on that. First, I'll just introduce myself. Mel Baser, one of the co-founders of HELM Construction Solutions with Kate. And I use they and them pronouns. So I identify as queer and non-binary.
Queer is an inclusive term for those who don't align with conventional gender identities and sexual orientations, challenging traditional norms.
What I wanted to bring up here, Fernando, I don't know if anyone saw the New York Times this morning, but the top story in the New York Times was around the housing crisis. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, it went on and on about how cities and states need to change their permitting and zoning laws, and that will somehow solve the housing crisis. Mm-hmm. And reading that, all I could think about was, why aren't we talking about workforce development? Why aren't we talking about the 500,000 new workers that we need to recruit and retain to this industry in 2024 alone? And so your question around the queer community and representation in the trades. So, I myself worked in the trades. There are lots of us, whether we're visible or not, we already are on your job site. But I think it is really important to talk about this aging workforce that we have, this massive labor shortage. Mm-hmm. How are we going to meet this, right? If you're out there running a business, one of your biggest stressors is not having the people with the skills to do the jobs, regardless of gender or sexuality or gender identity. So in my mind, this is about an industry needing to embrace a cultural revolution of sorts in order to survive and meet the demands, the housing demands, the climate demands, and the real workforce shortage. We were chatting earlier, Fernando, you mentioned the next generation of folks has a different relationship to inclusivity, to acceptance. I have an 11-year-old son. I know, I see it. And it's time to evolve as an industry. We've always been leading innovators. We've always been visionaries, people who love solving problems. Let's take all these great qualities from this industry and apply them not just to our projects on the job site, but also to our businesses and how we're functioning.
Why exclude anybody? Right. So that's
We've
the
got a big
fundamental
gap to
question.
fill. Yeah.
Right, we can't afford to exclude anyone from our workforce.
Yeah, that's good. That's correct. So how do you address that in your company HELM? I understand it's a HELM Construction Solutions. Do you focus on this issue in particular of gender inclusivity, or is this just one element? Or tell us about your company.
I don't want to say too much about what we do because this is more about the theme of gender and inclusivity. But I will say our company emerged as a result of many of our experiences in the industry and our frustrations, both personally and also witnessing, our families and thinking, man, this is a wonderful industry with so much potential, so much opportunity for people, and it's falling short, right? There's a lot more that we could do and we could do better. So Helm emerged out of that desire to support, particularly in the residential world, support small businesses, general contractors, design build firms, architecture firms, especially those working in the clean energy sector and the high performance building sector, to help them really think about and take their businesses as seriously as they take their craft, right? Because one of the biggest threats to this industry, as we've mentioned, is the viability of people being able to make a living. How do we make this feel and seem and actually be attractive to the next population of people? Part of that is meeting businesses where they're at, and this is what Helm does, helping them become more resilient businesses, better run, better work cultures. So we're a consulting, coaching, training, and project management firm that does just that. So this topic around inclusivity, gender, diversity, and work culture is a big part of what we do because there's so much focus on people needing to hire and retain folks. And what we see we've got about, 80 or so companies we're working with around the US and Canada. And what we see across many of these companies is they are all really desperate for good and reliable workers. And so the stakes have risen in terms of what the expectations are of a workplace. And if people aren't happy, there's statistics on this. If people aren't happy in their workplace, if they feel like it's toxic, they don't feel like they're being set up for success or respected, they're going to move on to the next company. You're going to lose your folks. So this is a big part of what we do. I don't know if you have other questions or if Kate wants to share more about how we navigate this, but
maybe Kate can address this a little bit, which is we spoke about a toolkit. You have a gender toolkit, right? And we love tools on this show. So let's talk about that toolkit. What's in that toolkit?
Sure. Well, that's something that we really put together because we knew a lot of business owners, they really want to do the right thing. But they just weren't sure what steps they could take, just kind of practical day-to-day steps. So what the toolkit includes, and it's a PDF you can get off of our website in our list of resources.
Free.
But it's really just, it's trying to bring awareness to some of the challenges around gender and inclusion on the job site, and just some really practical things you can do. So, one of the things that is true across the board when we talk about just being a great employer, right, is we want to have some good systems in place that cover the basics of onboarding. How do you bring new people in no matter who they are? How do you provide training and opportunities for advancement? How do you create mentorship opportunities so that folks who are coming into this industry new, really do see a path forward? So one of the tips that we talk about a lot is kind of like being intentional about what crew you might put someone on. If you hire a woman, maybe putting them on a crew with another woman or trans person, or if you hire someone who speaks Spanish, putting them on a crew maybe with other people who can speak Spanish so that they're not the only one in that situation. So that's kind of just one little piece of, because it's not, I think a lot of times there's this tendency to really focus on hiring and recruiting, right? And that's an important piece of this whole puzzle, is how are we reaching a wider audience. But it's equally, you can hire all kinds of people, but it's about retaining them and like
Right.
really giving them a good experience that will keep
Right.
them and make them want to stay. So I think that it's really important to be looking at both sides of both the recruiting process, but then the retention as well.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question. Maybe, Mel, you can answer this as a peculiar question, and I may be wrong about the premise of the question. I'm thinking from what you've just said, Kate, that if you create a welcoming place to be where people, and this is where I'm getting into risky waters, where people who maybe feel out of place elsewhere can feel very much at home. That's a slam dunk for retention. If you can make people feel good.
Mm.
So I wonder about that relative to LGBTQ people that maybe in their current employment just kind of don't feel all that great, but you've made them feel fantastic, welcome,
Yeah.
and totally like, here you are. This is your home.
Absolutely. What comes up for me, Fernando, is I'm generally a person, I come from a long line of tradespeople, long line of farmers here in northern Vermont. Deep down, despite our maybe perhaps political differences or philosophical differences, people are good, I believe, and want to feel connected.
Right.
A lot of the hate and the bigotry and the ignorance and violence, frankly, comes from a place of fear and insecurity. What I've observed over my time in the trades and in working, over the last couple decades with, hundreds of companies, is that business owners, and especially small business owners, which is really the backbone of construction, they have both a responsibility, but also a privilege and an opportunity to create a workplace where people feel seen and heard. And I'm not just talking about marginalized folks. Everything that we talk about and we do is about creating work cultures that feel good for everyone, right? And just, one little example, I could go on for days, and we don't have that, about the ways that folks who've lived different types of lives or have experienced different things can add so much value to a workplace, right? In ways that we don't even recognize and acknowledge. But one little example that I'll just use is, right, I'm 5'1", 5'1.5" if I'm cheating. And my wingspan is not very big, right? So on a construction site, when I was working as an apprentice carpenter and learning the trades, it was very hard for me to carry more than one sheet of drywall up a flight of stairs in San Francisco where I was working, right? And so I needed some support with that. And it created this whole conversation around how tradespeople, and particularly an industry that has been predominantly cisgendered men, what is our relationship to our bodies, right?
Cisgender, or cis, means a person's gender identity aligns with the sex assigned to them at birth, like a person assigned female at birth identifying as a woman. The term was first used in 1994.
My whole family are in the trades, and I witness lots of people be in the trades, destroy their bodies working.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a culture of not actually taking care of all of our needs. And so sometimes this is really about work smarter, not harder, and having people with different experiences, different perspectives, different ways to navigate a thing can be beneficial to everyone. Right. The other thing I just wanted to share is I was speaking with someone earlier who is someone who identifies as transgender, and they did not feel safe being out on their job site. So they were, having to present and live in a way that was not, authentically them. That's not a good recipe for anyone.
Transgender, or trans, means a person's gender identity doesn't match the sex they were assigned at birth.
If we can't be who we are and show up, and I believe, and be who we are and feel safe in our workplace and feel respected, this is a person who I know well brings tremendous value to a workplace. And that employer and those employers missed out on a wonderful and a fantastic and a really productive worker and leader. And there are thousands of stories like that. So again, whether we're talking about immigrants, we're talking about people who have been formerly incarcerated, we're talking about women, we're talking about folks of color, youth, or trans folks, or people who are neurodivergent.
Neurodiversity is a way of understanding that people's brains work differently. It's a broad term that includes conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and Tourette's syndrome. But it also includes people who don't have any of these conditions. Basically, it says that all the different ways our brains could work are part of what's human.
Right? We could go on and list. This is an industry that is ripe for change. We are an aging industry. We don't have a choice. And one of the last things, sorry, I'm going off on a soapbox here, but the last thing I'll say, Fernando, is one of the struggles is that a lot of our companies, and Kate, you can attest to this, they all want to hire people with experience and skills who are ready to come and do the job because there's a lot of work to be done. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we've realized is that no one is going to save us, right? We need to grow. I mean, particularly in the residential where it's not really union track in most of our rural areas. Right. We need to shift our mindset and recognize and acknowledge that we need programs and ways to involve and incorporate younger people, people who are shifting and transitioning to new careers, people who have less skills, and maybe they have less hands-on trade skills, but maybe they're an amazing communicator or a really good organizer, or they understand building science. There's a lot of space in this industry for a lot of different ways to think, and we need to shift this culture so that we can take advantage of that. Yeah. Otherwise, we're going to just continue to have this struggle.
You know, I got two wonderful things out of what you just said. One of them is
only two.
Well, I get a lot of wonderful things, but two things came to me. One of them is that you always think in terms of, okay, now we're going to somehow put the word out that we're an LGBTQ friendly company. Welcome these folks in, right? But what you don't realize is that maybe when you begin to become a more open company, open-minded company and welcoming, is that you discover that you already have those employees. And suddenly they're beginning to feel a little more comfortable coming to work every day. And maybe your buddy, the one that, you had no idea, because I've had that experience.
You have witnessed that as well. Maybe the other thing, and Kate, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how you prepare yourself for even beginning to hire more diverse candidates, because I think that this is a really important step in the process that's often missed.
Which is signaling. Like, how do you signal? And this maybe comes to like, what do you do in your little, newspaper help wanted ad? How do you signal that you are open as a company and welcoming?
I mean, there certainly are strategies for signaling, but I think what Mel's getting at is kind of even before you get to that point, right? Because like we were saying, even before we get to the recruiting part, we want to make sure that the overall company culture is going to actually be welcoming, right? So often we're going in and working with companies that might be a group of a dozen all white guys.
We love white guys, by the way.
We love white guys.
Love all our clients.
But to work with them to kind of help build that connection, help build their communication skills, to be able to talk about the work that they're doing.
Can you give us some examples of that, like the communication skills?
This is a very local example here in Vermont. Well, two, actually. Last week, we were at NESI Building Energy Conference in Boston, and then we were at JLC Live. Next week, we're going to the Better Buildings by Design conference in Burlington, Vermont. All of these spaces are now beginning to embrace these conversations because they understand it, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's a necessary thing to do. So there are conversations happening now in these spaces. And in fact, HELM is leading a workshop at the next conference on how to build an inclusive culture, right? And so I think company owners, part of it is be proactive in getting educated, right? And so if you want to be a good ally, or we should talk numbers too. Like I come from, being an estimator and a project manager. Kate does a lot with the financial management, QuickBooks. We know that there is a monetary and a profitability aspect to this conversation too. Because we look out and we see where are the breakdowns in companies' processes, in their communication, in their interpersonal. This is part of why HELM has professional coaches on our team and trainers. We understand that businesses are just groups of people, and people are complicated, and how they communicate with one another, how they work collaboratively together. Fernando, I don't know how many job sites or companies you've been in where you're like, oh yeah, that guy can't work on that job site with that guy.
Yep.
Right?
Oh,
they
yes.
don't get along.
Yeah.
It's not good for business, right? And I'm not saying everyone's going to get along. There's personalities, but part of inclusive company cultures, again, is trying to identify what are the things that are a threat to your business profitability and your business viability, right? And your company culture. We hear lots and lots of stories across companies of people, not necessarily our clients, hopefully, but they're getting new hires because those folks are leaving companies that have toxic work cultures. And a lot of them are white men, right? And so there's a ripple effect on the business, on the viability and the culture, and how people feel when they show up in their workplace, right? So many of our hours are spent working. And if you have to go to work and deal with jerks on the job site, like I had at one point, it doesn't make you want to work there.
Sure. It cuts productivity quite a bit. Unhappiness is not a productive feeling. So as we were also speaking, the second thing I recalled was being at the International Builders Show just a few months ago. And I'm in a room, a presentation, it's full of people, and there's two women. We always hear women buy homes. This is the home builders conference. They supposedly sell homes. We always say it's the women that buy the homes. There are women in the conference, but I mean, very few by comparison. So I thought, that's quite an imbalance, because if you're building homes, you are building human habitat. And I think you really want the full range of humanity involved, right? You certainly want women, but you want everyone, because you're building habitat. You're not building male clubhouses. So you're building for everyone. And in fact, the industry recognizes that the male is almost like the least important element in the home decision making, and yet we're all men. There's got to be some blind spots. I only know my own perception. I can't perceive the full range of humanity. So how would I get that full range into my business, but to include the full range of humanity in my business? No. You guys, I'm so happy you guys are going to the conferences and presenting and all. I didn't know you'd been.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
Those are some of my favorite conferences, the Vermont Energy Conference and the JLC.
Well,
and
we'll be at the IBS next year.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I will look for you. Tell us your website and how people can get a hold of this. Some of your tools that you say are free.
So again, the company is called HELM Construction Solutions, and our website is buildhelm.com. And if you get on there, you'll see the resources section, which includes blog posts, articles, the toolkit, and a variety of other things that we will share with everyone.
Yeah. For the listeners out there who are in their 50s and their 60s, they're getting ready to think about retirement, perhaps, and they've spent their life building a business, right? We know what it takes. It's a lot of work. It's pretty tricky to turn around and sell a business for lots of money, right? A construction business. So one of the things we've really been thinking about as we consider how to support this industry to evolve to meet the growing demands of the workforce and the housing and the climate is some of this is going to happen through recruiting new folks to this industry, like half the population that we haven't ever tried to recruit, right, to the industry. But a lot of this can happen in these really critical moments as companies are thinking about ownership transitions. And this is a whole area that we're really excited about because you're able to start with a company that has a little more stability in their systems. They got a customer base, they've got a good loyal team. But a lot of times owners, particularly if it's a sole proprietor or, a couple or whatnot, they're a little stuck in how do I transition out without, undermining the company? And we think that this is a really strategic opportunity for a cultural shift in the company, and doing it in a way that also builds a more resilient and a company of more value, right? So whether you're selling to an outside buyer less likely, or you're selling the company to someone or someone's within your company, or you're doing a co-op conversion. I feel like this could be a really important and critical moment, particularly as I hear the term silver tsunami thrown out there, and sort of this idea that there's a tidal wave of gray-haired
of people like me.
me a little bit. But looking to retire or transition, and they're kind of stuck. And my Pepe, my grandfather, didn't have a chance to ever retire out. He was up, framing roofs into his late 70s. And so Kate and I both come from families of tradespeople. And so we're really passionate about the work that people put into this has a lot of value. And this is a really important area for, these overlapping themes that we're talking about today.
Yeah, that's an important theme. It's worthy of a whole different session. Yeah. And so you have a company that really provides a full range of consulting services. So people don't just hire you for this one thing. They hire you for kind of a complete package of
all hands on
support.
deck. Yeah.
All hands on deck. So I think that's wonderful.
When folks are hiring, when construction companies are hiring, first it's usually, who do you know? My uncle's brothers, whatever, right? It's sort of old boys club. So if they're actually going through the steps of putting out a job ad, one of the things we want to underscore, and you kind of rose it up here, is yes, carpentry skills are important, but it takes more than just carpentry skills to be a productive and effective worker in this industry, right? And so some of this is to challenge what are some of the other skill sets that people might bring that would contribute and add to a job site. My own personal experience, I remember walking on a job site, as a house painter as a youth, but I didn't have carpentry experience. I didn't have the opportunity, like many young boys did, to work with the male members of their family using tools. And so there's already a disadvantage. But for myself and for a lot of folks who are not cisgendered men on construction sites, they have to go above and beyond and prove themselves. They have to be the one who's always on time, the most organized, the most useful, the best communicator. I mean, there's all these kind of hidden ways that both women, queer folks, and probably people of color and immigrants have to overcompensate just to be kind of accepted and respected on job sites. And it is an extra strain. And so when you were saying that, women are experiencing the same kind of discrimination on construction sites that they used to, we're in conversation with lots of women in the trades, and they are. It may not all be the same kind of blatant forms of harassment that we think of, but there are microaggressions, there are these subtle things, there is an emotional and strain and physical strain and fear that people still experience.
Thank you so much for this really impressive work that you do, for this fantastic information, and let's try and put it into practice. So a little homework just for fun. And I already made a mistake today when I said I'm so glad you guys are doing these conferences, right? So just for fun, and this applies to me, I think before almost anyone else, why don't we do a little homework? We always have homework on the ProTradeCraft Career Toolbox, and our homework is to try to go an entire day without using gender-specific language or terms. And this includes avoiding words like guys when addressing a group and replacing them with more inclusive terms like everyone or team.
Man hours.
Man hours.
That's one of the most common ones we see.
Yes, it is. So pay attention to your conversations and see if you can spot any unintentional biases in your language. And if you catch yourself slipping, like I did, it's okay to acknowledge it and try to correct it moving forward. This exercise is not just about changing how we speak, but also becoming more aware of our unconscious biases and who we're speaking to and what impact our words can have. So share your experience with colleagues or friends and discuss what you learned from this exercise. And let's work together to create a more inclusive and respectful environment in our industry and in our world. So thank you so much. You have been wonderful guests, and I really appreciate your time and your patience too with me.
Thank you for the opportunity, Fernando. It's so important that as an ally and as someone with, a voice in this industry is raising this issue up. And so we're just really grateful to you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks so much, Fernando.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Mel. And we look forward to having you on again.
Great.
Anytime.